Hi everyone, this is Jamie and Paul, and today we'll be going over universal design for learning. And if you've heard of UDL, great. If you have an idea of what that is, then awesome. And if you've never heard of it, then we're going to go over that topic in depth today. And by the end of this presentation, you're going to know exactly what UDL is all about. Okay. Today's objective, we're going to define what UDL is. We're going to explain the benefits and history of UDL, recognize the framework that kind of make up three principles of UDL, and also identify the strategies to implement UDL. What is UDL? UDL stands for Universal Design for Learning, and it is defined as an educational framework based on research in the learning sciences. It includes, cognitive neurosciences that kind of guides the development of flexible learning environments and learning spaces that can accommodate individual learning differences. UDL is a set of principles to kind of provide structure to develop instructions to meet the diverse needs of learners. UDL is a way of thinking about teaching and learning that helps give all learners a type of equal opportunity to succeed. Now, why UDL? Why do we put an emphasis and importance on this? And this is because there is a diverse group of learners. The way people learn is as unique as our own fingerprints. And then being able to kind of design learning to, encompass everyone's learning needs, wants, will allow all types of learners to be able to kind of thrive and succeed without limiting access to, people with disabilities. UDL is an approach to kind of minimize any type of barriers and focuses on maximizing learning for all. Some of the benefits for UDL is that it provides flexibility in how the information is presented in ways for learners to kind of respond or demonstrate their knowledge and also the skill and the way they are engaged. It reduces the barriers in instruction to provide approximate accommodation and support and challenges, and also maintain a high level of expectations for all learners, including ones with disabilities. A little brief history of universal design. It actually stems from architecture and urban planning. It's part of a movement that started in building architecture and thinking of the widest range of users for them to kind of include disabilities that may need accessibility in and out of around the facilities and the structures. And it was originally actually formulated by Ronald L. Mace of the North Carolina State University, who kind of defined it as universal design is the design of products and environment to be usable by all people to the greatest possible extent without the need for adaptation or specialized design. An example of that would be this picture here. You're going to see, several designs of individual accessibility around the structure. For the stairs, they're accessible by those who are able-bodied, like me and you. The handrails are made for those who might have mobile impairments, or they actually need the actual help to balance walking through the flight of stairs. And lastly, the ramps are made for wheelchair accessibility, or even a mother who has a stroller getting in and out of the buildings without any type of physical barriers. Now, there are some assumptions of universal design that one size fits all. Instead, we should offer a variety to benefit everyone. It's added on later. Instead, it should be designed from the beginning, executing it from the start. Access for some, instead, it should be access for everyone. Be mindful of limiting the access to kind of certain individuals. Access should be offered for the widest variety of individuals possible. An example of universal design is the design of an automatic door. The design here is kind of universal and it benefits everyone. The design will help you and me kind of be able to walk in and out of the building, whether it's a person with the luggage indicated here in this picture, or a mom with a stroller, or even somebody carrying too much things in their hands or groceries. It's going to help assist people who might be, in a wheelchair, or someone who's kind of recently recovering from an accident, or temporarily, using crutches to kind of walk around. The design itself kind of assists these types of people and provide them equal access in and out of buildings. This use of universal design kind of helps innovate and also create accessibility from the start and from the get-go. Now, where did the learning part come into the universal design? It actually stems from the UDL framework, which was defined by David H. Rose in the 1990s, who was an EDD student of the Harvard Graduate School and also the Center of Applied Technology, CAST. And this framework kind of calls for creating curriculum based on the three key principles of UDL that provides multiple means of representation, action and expression, and also engagement. Taking a deeper look, there are three key principles that make up the framework of UDL and that neuroscience suggests our brains have three broad networks. One is the recognition network, the what of learning. Another one is the strategic networks, the how of learning, and one for the effective networks, which is the why of learning. Now, learners need to help gain knowledge, skill, and enthusiasm for learning. These guidelines offer a set of concrete suggestions and also can be applied to various disciplines or domains to help ensure that learners can access and participate in meaningful, challenging learning opportunities. Let's take a look at each one of these. Number one is provide multiple means of representation. How the learner acquires the new information. You present content information in a multimedia and also provide varied support. It's what you see, it's what you hear and read, and it kind of gives the learners various ways of kind of acquiring information and also the knowledge. Now, representation can be achieved by using perception, language, mathematical expressions and symbols, and comprehension. Let's take a look at each one of them. Perception offers ways of customizing the displays of the information. There are many different types of learners, thus having multiple ways of displaying this information will kind of help create, help for all types of learners. Perception also, offers an alternative for auditory and visual information to kind of help aid learners, even one with impairments or different types of disabilities. Now, some strategies of perception would be a number chart. Now, for example, outlining steps from numbers 1 to 10. This can help learners kind of follow instructions that need to go in a particular order or to achieve the same results. These charts can also help aid learners in identifying the different numerical and also the orders to establish patterns within these numbers. Now, transcript are visual supports kind of help learners be able to kind of see the information that is being presented auditorily. This will kind of allow learners to be able to monitor the incoming information, auditory information, or even help them, the learners kind of fill in any types of gaps of information that they may have be missed due to hearing loss or being distracted. Now, these transcripts kind of help break down large amounts of verbal information and also allow learners to kind of track and present the content. An example of that would be if you're providing a transcript for pre-recorded lectures, the learners can listen to the content, or they can actually choose to read the transcript itself. And it kind of allows the learner to be able to kind of hear, who have hearing impairments, kind of be able to digest the content by reading it versus audio form. Text to speech utilizes the computer application to kind of read the content out loud, mimicking how it would be read by a person. This kind of helps learners kind of have difficulties with reading fluencies or comprehension. An example in my line of work as instructional designer, we use the text-to-speech and authoring tools such as Storyline to present content. Sometimes, not having a voiceover is a reality of creating e-learning modules. So using text-to-speech kind of provides the next best thing in providing audio for the learning. It kind of breaks down the content and helps those who might have reading comprehensions or for those who may speak a different language. For language, the mathematical expressions, symbols, actually help clarify vocabulary and symbols. It clarifies syntax and structures. They support, decoding text, mathematical notations, and symbols. And it also promotes the understanding across languages and illustrates multiple media. Some strategies for those are a glossary, and it's a list of terms and definitions of an outline of concepts throughout the lesson. The glossary can be used as a quick reference guide to kind of help the concepts actually being taught. An example of that would be a glossary terminology used in the course, and this kind of help learners kind of have resources to be able to kind of define the words they're unfamiliar with. Those provide a good resource for personal development and also for you to kind of look back at the glossary words so that they have have trouble identifying what they actually are and what they mean. And then, there's nothing more frustrating than hearing a word that you don't know, and it can really throw a wrench in your actual learning. Word sorts are actually spelling and vocabulary development activities that involve grouping of words into a specific category. And this is going to help learners kind of focus more on essential features of the word, of the sound structure, and also the meaning. Reference material, it's another strategy. It's going to be where resources learners can kind of use for a learning task. The materials provided, useful information that can help during with work with accurate or easy to understand information. An example with that of reference materials is a reference guide. These guides can help users be able to kind of navigate through learning new software, different tools, and it's hard for learners to kind of retain a lot of information. So having a reference guide or a job aid can actually help them complete their different tasks. Closed sentence are sentences that are where keywords are either deleted, covered up, or blocked out. Learners can kind of use these context clues to help determine what the actual missing words are. Now, this is going to help the learners kind of focus more on particular words in a sentence to understand how language actually works. The use of animation helps visually explain concepts that are either static illustration or text descriptions that I might be able to kind of capture. So the use of animation enables, another way to have to help deliver the content. Some of us, are visual learners, so having information and content in animation form actually brings a new and more refreshing way to kind of digest these types of information. Now, animation can be, help illustrate complex or dense content that can be easily represented through visual learning. Comprehension can activate or supply background knowledge. It kind of highlights the patterns, critical features, ideas, relationship. It acts as a guide for informational processing, visualization, manipulation, and it also maximizes transfer and generalization. Let's take a look at some of the strategies. Pre-reading. Pre-reading is a set of reading strategies that is utilized before any type of learning to engage in a text. Reading prior to these training or lessons will actually encourage learners to kind of have access to background knowledge, and that can be used as a tool to improve comprehension. Highlighting emphasizes the key words or phrases, key points, arguments to kind of help learners kind of locate the key information that's important. When we are reading or learning dense amounts of information, the text can be begin to get jumbled up and kind of get mixed in everywhere. But using color coding can actually use to distinguish between the different categories of key information. It's going to help important information stand out to the reader. Chunking is another strategy. It's going to be where the content is grouped into smaller sections in order to make information easy to retain and recall. Now, chunking helps with short-term memory. It can also help the brain to kind of quickly process information. And chunking is typically used for more complex concepts to kind of help break down information into more digestible amounts for us so that learners won't get so overwhelmed with information or the concept they're trying to understand. A video, it's going to bring forth more of a non-print audio visual accessibility form of content to the learners. So video can actually enhance the content, the concepts by giving more of a visual representation of the ideas. And video can also help engage learners to kind of understand more complex information. And now I'm actually going to pass it on to Paul. He's actually going to finish up the second half of the presentation, and he's actually going to be going over the actions and expressions of UDL.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm going to start sharing and from current slide. That looks good?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so for my first slide, I'm going to talk about what it means to provide multiple means of action and expression and its connection to how learners in your course show that they now know that they've learned something. They're walking away with something that they didn't have access to before. So in a lot of ways, you want to think of UDL framework as a program of show and tell, except in reverse, because the instructor is going to tell, speak on, and present course materials, and the students are going to show, demonstrate, and perform what they've learned using predefined assessments. So with this in mind, it's important to remember that learners differ in the ways that they can navigate a learning environment and express what they know. So for example, individuals with significant movement impairment, such as cerebral palsy, those who struggle with strategic and organizational abilities, such as, or they're called executive function disorders, or those who have language barriers and so forth. People with different backgrounds, they all approach learning the same task very differently. So some may be able to express themselves well in written text, but not speech, or vice versa. So it should be recognized that action and expression require a great deal of strategy, practice, and organization. And this is another area in which learners can differ from one another. So the reality is that there is no one means of action and expression that will be optimal for all learners in the classroom. So this means that providing multiple options for action and expression is essential in a classroom or any learning environment. So if you're an instructor here today, we urge you to give your learners options to express what they know from the material you're teaching. And throughout this process, provide models, sample work, feedback, and rubrics for the level of proficiency your assignment requires. So by offering numerous means of action and expression, you're allowing learners to engage with your course content at their current level of understanding, which then helps create additional paths for scaffolding into higher order thinking or thinking orders as you move forward or towards completion of the course. So let's look further at action and expression and what they actually mean. So looking at action and expression, we start within the context of UDL. We see that it's determined by 3 elements, and we start with physical action. So just like a textbook or a workbook or any kind of print media is limited in the means of navigation and physical interaction, just like how many pages you're turning or how much space you have to write in the negative space. Many interactive pieces of educational software similarly provide limited means of navigation and interaction, such as using a joystick or keyboard or whatever input. The navigation and interaction in these limited ways will raise barriers for some learners, so especially those with physical disabilities such as blindness, something referred to as dysgraphia, which is an inability to write coherently, usually a symptom of brain damage. And those are who need the various kinds of executive functioning supports. So with these considerations, it's important to provide materials with which all learners can interact. Properly designed curricular materials provide a seamless interface with common assistive technologies through which individuals can move, impairments can navigate, and express what they know. So this is again to allow navigation or interaction with a single switch, maybe through voice-activated switches or expanded keyboards and other assistive and adaptive tools. Moving over to expression and communication. There is no medium of expression that is equally suited for all learners or for all kinds of communication. So on the contrary, there are media which seem poorly suited for some kinds of expression and for some kinds of learning. So while a learner with dyslexia, for example, may excel at storytelling and conversation, they may stumble and falter when they're telling the same story in writing. So for this reason, it's important to provide alternative modalities for expression, both to level the playing field among learners and to allow the learner to appropriately and or more easily express their knowledge, ideas, and concepts in the learning environment. And this is ultimately the goal of any course. So again, providing multiple opportunities of expression is really key for student success. And moving to the last point here for executive functions, this is at the highest level of human capacity to act skillfully, or what are so-called the executive functions. These are associated with networks that include the prefrontal cortex. These capabilities allow humans to overcome impulse, short-term reactions to their environment, and instead to set long-term goals, plan effective strategies, and plan effective strategies for reaching those goals, monitoring the progress, and even modifying strategies as needed. So in short, they allow learners to take advantage of their environment. And of critical importance here to educators is the fact that executive functions have very limited capacity due to working memory. This is going to be really key because it's going to come up later. And this is true because of the executive capacity is sharply reduced when one, executive functioning capacity must be developed to manage lower level skills and responses, which are not automatic or fluent. And it takes away from that higher kind of level thinking or function. And two, the executive capacity itself is reduced due to some sort of higher level disability or lack of fluency with executive strategies. So here the UDL framework typically involves efforts to expand executive capacity in 2 ways. So the first way is by scaffolding lower levels so that they require less executive processing. And 2, by scaffolding higher level executive skills and strategies so that they are more effective and developed. Previous guidelines have addressed lower level scaffolding, and this guideline addresses ways to provide scaffolding for executive functions themselves. So let's take a look at each of these 3 points. And so taking a closer look at physical action, we see that this can vary the methods for response and navigation. This is where learners differ widely in their ability to navigate their physical environment. So again, we want to reduce barriers. And to do that, for the learning environment, we want to introduce the selection and composition, so would be introduced by the motor demands of a task, provide alternative means for response and selection and composition. So in addition, learners differ widely in their optimal means for navigation through information and activities. And so to provide equal opportunity for interactions and learning experiences, an instructor must ensure that there are multiple means for navigation and control is accessible. And so that can look like providing alternatives in the requirements for rate, timing, speed, and range of motor, depending on the type of assessment. You can also provide alternatives for physically responding or indicating, such as marking with a pen or mouse controls, or maybe the reactions like in Zoom when you're just giving a thumbs up. That's just another way to interact. Or provide alternatives for physically interacting with materials by hand, voice, maybe keyboard, joystick, an adaptive kind of input. It's just, again, creating that opportunity for input using different tools. And the last point here is that it optimizes access to tools and assistive technologies. So providing a learner with a tool is often not enough. We need to provide the support for the use of this tool effectively. Many learners need help navigating through their environment, both in terms of physical space and curriculum, so the web kind of environment or the course environment. And all learners should be given the opportunity to use tools that might help them meet the goal of full participation in the classroom. However, significant numbers of learners with disabilities have to use assistive technologies for navigation, interaction, and composition on a regular basis. So that's something we have to always keep in mind. And it's critical that instructional technologies and curricula do not impose barriers to the use of these assistive technologies. So an important design consideration, for example, is to ensure that there are keyboard commands for any mouse action so that learners can use common assistive technologies that depend upon those types of commands. It's also important, however, to ensure that making a lesson physically accessible does not inadvertently remove its challenge to learning. So this can, again, look like providing alternative keyboard commands or mouse action. You can provide access to alternative keyboards. You can customize overlays for touch screens and keyboards. Again, this is all the physical component of learning, right? So we want to just kind of keep these in mind because not everyone can interact in the same way that we do. And here are just a few strategies for physical action as well. This is a choice board. It's a display of images or icons available, options to the learner to use to communicate their wants and needs with others. And this could also be done anonymously in a way, so to encourage authenticity. We can also use speech to text as something that Jamie touched on already, and this is an assistive technology where the learner's spoken words are converted into text on the screen. This will assist learners who have difficulty typing or writing by hand. Maybe there's an injury or disability, maybe temporary or permanent. And in the same vein, you can also provide course materials in an audio format rather than needing to read assigned content. So in this sense, learners have the ability to listen to course readings or chapter reading through an MP3 file rather than having to, visually read. So again, this is just one of a different kind of physical component to incorporating this in a classroom. Moving on to expression and communication. This is achieved by using multiple media for communication. So specific media and materials are critical to the goal. It is important to provide alternative media for expression. So such alternatives reduce media-specific barriers to expression among learners with a variety of special needs, but it also increases the opportunities for all learners to develop a wider range of expression in a media-rich world that we now live in. So for example, it's important that all learners learn composition, not just writing, and learn the optimal medium for any particular content of expression and audience. So again, this could look like the use of physical manipulatives such as blocks, 3D models, maybe base 10 blocks that's used in math. The use of social media and interactive web tools such as discussion forums, chats, web design, annotation tools, storyboards, or solving problems using a variety of different strategies, again, using some of these tools. Moving to multiple tools for construction and composition. There's a tendency for schooling to focus on traditional tools rather than contemporary ones. So this tendency has several liabilities. One, it does not prepare learners for their future. Two, it limits the range of content and teaching methods that can be implemented in the classroom. Three, it restricts learners' ability to express knowledge about content via the assessment piece of a course. And most importantly, it constricts the kind of learners who can be successful. So you're defining what success looks like in the classroom based off the assessment and the expression that you're allowing students to participate in. So again, it's just multiple means of expression is what allows more students to be successful in the classroom. So current media tools provide a more flexible and accessible toolkit with which learners can more successfully take part in the learning and articulate what they know. So this can look like providing spell checkers, grammar checkers. This is all kind of built into Word software now. Provide text-to-speech software or voice recognition. You can provide calculators or graph or pre-formatted graph paper. Again, these are all just kind of materials that can be provided and as necessary throughout the course in order for them to be successful. You can also provide virtual or concrete mathematic manipulatives. Again, these are algebra blocks, or the use of web applications like we mentioned with social media. Moving to the third point here, which is to build fluencies with graduated levels of support for practice and performance. So here, learners must develop a variety of influences, such as visual, audio, mathematical, reading, etc. And this means that they often need multiple scaffolds to assist them as they practice and develop independence. So curricula should offer alternatives in the degrees of freedom available, with highly scaffolded and supported opportunities provided for some and wide degrees of freedom for others who are ready for more independence. So fluency is also built through many opportunities for performance, be it in the form of an essay or dramatic production. Performance helps learners because it also allows them to synthesize their learning in personally relevant ways. So overall, it's important to provide options that learners can build on. And so this can be providing differentiated feedback, provide scaffolds that can be gradually released with increasing independence and skill as you move through the course, and provide differentiated mentors, so teachers and tutors who use different approaches to motivate and guide and provide feedback. So again, you're getting a variety or a mixed bag of experiences that will hopefully aid you in the learning process. So I'm going to move into some strategies for expression and communication. I'm going to look at total physical response. This is a kinesthetic teaching method where learners listen to commands and respond with physical action and movement. The Venn diagram, which is a chart that contains 2 or more overlapping circles that learners can use to compare and contrast topics in logical and organized manner. And even multiple choice. So this allows learners to generate free-form responses that demonstrate their knowledge by selecting the correct answers from a fixed set of choices. And these answer choices can also be represented using pictures and objects and can assist in building confidence in learners and be able to get to the level of free-form response, which is now tapping into their own kind of thinking and their words, and really allows them to elaborate how they understand a concept in the course. Moving over to executive functions, I'm going to start with the first, which is the guide appropriate goal setting. So it can't be assumed that learners will set appropriate goals to guide their work, but the answer should not be to provide goals for students. Such a short-term remedy does little to develop new skills or strategies in any learner, and therefore it's important that learners develop the skills of effective goal setting. So the UDL framework embeds graduated scaffolds for learning to set personal goals that are both challenging and realistic for each individual learner. So this can look like providing prompts for scaffold to estimate effort, resources, and difficulty. You want to provide models or examples of the process and product of goal setting. Provide guides and checklists for scaffolding, and post goals, objectives, and schedules in an obvious place, something that easily they can reference. To the second point here, is support planning and strategy development. Once a goal is set, effective learners and problem solvers will plan a strategy, including tools that they will use for reaching that goal. Depending on your audience, for young children in any domain, older learners in a new domain, or any learner with any of the disabilities that comprise executive functions, the strategic plan step is often omitted, and trial and error attempts take its place instead. So to help learners become more planful and strategic, a variety of options are needed, such as cognitive speed bumps that prompt them to stop and to think, graduated scaffolds that also help them actually implement strategies, or engagement in decision-making with competent mentors. So this can look like embedded prompts, such as a stop and think, which we'll touch on a little bit more, or embed prompts to show and explain your work, such as a portfolio or an art critique, or even provide guides for breaking long-term goals into reachable short-term objectives. Moving over to facilitate managing information and resources. one of the limits of executive function is that imposed by the limitations of so-called working memory. So we mentioned this earlier. Our working memory is a scratch pad for maintaining chunks of information where they can be accessed as part of our comprehension and problem solving, but it's very limited for every learner and even more severely limited for many who have cognitive disabilities. So as a result, many such learners seem disorganized, forgetful, and unprepared. And wherever working memory capacity is not construct relevant in a lesson, it's important to provide a variety of internal scaffolds and external organizational aids. Exactly those kinds the executive functions use. This is to help keep information organized and in mind. So what you can do here is provide graphic organizers for templates for data collection and organizing. You could provide or embed prompts for categorizing and systemizing information, or you could provide checklists and guides for note-taking. And to the last point, that's to enhance capacity for monitoring progress. Learning cannot happen without feedback, and that means that learners need a clear picture of the progress that they are or are not making in the course. So when assessments and feedback do not inform instructions or when they are not given to the students in a timely manner, learning cannot change because students do not know what to do differently. This lack of knowledge about what to improve can make some learners seem careless or unmotivated. For these learners, all of the time, and for most learners, some of the time, it is important to ensure that option can be customized to provide feedback that is more explicit, timely, informative, and accessible. Especially important is providing formative feedback that allows learners to monitor their own progress effectively and to use that information guide to their own effort and practice. So some suggestions here are to ask questions, to guide self-monitoring and reflection, just have a student, stop, think, and just look back at what they've learned so far. You could also use templates that guide self-reflection on quality and completeness, such as using a checklist. You could also use assessments of checklists or scoring rubrics and multiple examples of annotated student work and performance. And I think that last example is pretty important because you want to make it clear for what you find as acceptable work in a class or as part of an assessment or an activity. And providing these examples makes it visual, makes it clear for students in terms of what they can submit. So looking over some other strategies for executive function, we have progress monitoring. Again, this is a process where data is collected and analyzed to determine the effectiveness of instructional practices. The data can then be used to revise curriculum and create more effective learning environment. So our Beachboard learning management system offers this in a user progress tool. As a student, you can monitor your own progress. You can see what you've accessed and how long. There's a lot of detailed information. So again, this is just one of those elements or strategies for executive function that allows you to just be aware, have a heightened sense of awareness in how you're doing in the class. Another is exemplars. Again, I've mentioned that these are really important in a class. These are models of completed assignments that provide learners with a sample of what the project requires. So providing these exemplars are a great way to make it clear for students so that there's no confusion with respect to what kind of work they can submit, and in order to better understand what is a completed work. So exemplars are a perfect way to do that. Mnemonics is also a visual enhancement strategy that relates new information to prior knowledge using visual and verbal cues. The use of letter associations such as acronyms can be beneficial. So just please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. I'm sure we all know that one. And moving on to feedback rubric. Again, feedback is in a timely and when delivered in a timely manner is really effective for teaching and learning. Otherwise, learning doesn't really occur because we think we're doing everything right without feedback. So this will assist learners on to help focus on the shortcomings and improve their work. So again, feedback and using a rubric to do that is also very effective. Okay, moving over to engagement. And how learners engage with the learning process. This is where you want to provide multiple means of engagement. And by that, we mean how the learner engages with the learning process. Because what fires up one learner will not fire up another. This gives learners options to fuel their interests and autonomy. And that's going to be really important for classroom success. And so to tap into the learner's interests and challenge them appropriately and motivate them, we want to keep these engagement elements in mind. So because student affect represents a crucial element to learning, and because learners differ marked wildly in the ways that they engage or stay motivated, There are a variety of sources that can influence individual variation in affect, including neurology, culture, personal relevance, subjectivity, and background knowledge, along with a variety of other factors. So in reality, there's just no one means of engagement that will be optimal for all learners in our context. So providing multiple options for engagement is once again essential. So we're going to look at the three elements here. We're going to start with the recruiting interest. So information that is not attended to or that does not engage a learner's cognition is going to be information that's always going to be inaccessible. So in that sense, no real learning is ever happening if we're not recruiting their interest. So it's inaccessible in that both in the moment and in the future, because relevant information goes unnoticed and unprocessed, as a result, teachers devote considerable effort to recruiting learner attention and engagement. But learners differ significantly in what attracts their attention and engages their interest. So even the same learner will differ over time and circumstance because their interests change or they develop and gain new knowledge and skills. Or maybe their biological environment change and they develop into a more self-determined, adult learner. So it's therefore important to have alternative ways to recruit learner interest and ways that reflect the important inter and intra-individual differences among them. For the second point, in order to sustain effort and persistence, there are many kinds of learning, particularly the learning of skills and strategies, which require sustained attention and effort. So when motivated to do so, many learners can regulate their own attention and effect in order to sustain the effort and concentration and such that learning will occur. However, learners differ considerably in their ability to self-regulate in this way. And so their differences reflect disparity in their initial motivation, their capacity for skill, for self-regulation, susceptibility, and so forth. So a key instructional goal is to build individual skills and self-regulation and self-determination that will equalize learning opportunities. So in the meantime, the external environment must provide options that can equalize accessibility by supporting learners who differ in their initial motivation, regulation skills, and etc. So moving into self-regulation, this last point, while it is important to design the extrinsic environment so that it can support motivation and engagement, it's also important to develop learners' intrinsic abilities to regulate their own emotions and motivations. So the ability to self-regulate, to strategically modulate one's emotional reaction or states in order to be more effective at coping and engaging with the environment is a critical aspect of human development. While many individuals develop self-regulatory skills on their own, either by trial and error or by observing successful adults, many others have significant difficulties in developing these skills. So unfortunately, some classrooms do not address these skills explicitly, leaving them as part of the implicit curriculum that is often inaccessible or invisible to many. So those teachers and settings that address self-regulation explicitly will be the most successful in applying UDL principles through modeling and prompting in a variety of methods. Okay, and moving on to the recruiting interest component. We'll see that this is achieved by optimizing individual choice and autonomy. So in an instructional setting, it is often appropriate to provide choice for the learning objectives itself, to offer choices in how the objective can be reached. So in the context of achieving the objective, in the tool or supports available and so forth, we just want to be mindful of allowing those different avenues to be explored. By offering learners choices, they can develop self-determination, pride in accomplishment, and increase the degree to which they feel connected to their learning. However, it's important to note that individuals differ in how much and what kind of choices they prefer to have. So it's therefore not enough to simply provide choice. It's the right kind of choice and the level of independence that must be optimized to ensure engagement. So this can be providing learners with as much discretion and autonomy as possible, or you could allow learners to practice in the design of a classroom activity and academic task, or involve learners where and whenever possible in setting their own personal academic and behavioral goals. Moving to the second point, we want to optimize relevance, value, and authenticity. So individuals are engaged by information and activities that are relevant and valuable to their interests and goals. So this does not necessarily mean that the situation has to be equivalent to real life, just as fiction can be just as engaging as to learners as nonfiction. But it does mean that it has to be relevant and authentic to learners' individual goals and the activities that have no relevance or value. So in an educational setting, one of the most important ways that teachers recruit interest is to highlight the utility and relevance of learning and to demonstrate that relevance through authentic, meaningful activities. It's a mistake, of course, to assume that learners will find the same activities or information equally relevant or valuable to their goals. However, to recruit all learners equally, it's critical to provide options that optimizes relevancy, value, and meaning. And so a couple of suggestions are to vary the activities and sources of information that can be used. So these could be socially relevant or culturally relevant and responsive. You could include activities that foster the use of imagination to solve novel and relevant problems or make sense of complex ideas in a different or creative way, or provide tasks that allow for active participation, exploration, and experimentation. And for the last point here, we want to minimize threats and distractions. So one of the most important things a teacher can do is to create a safe space for learners. So to do this, teachers need to reduce the potential threats and distractions in the learning environment. And when learners have to focus their attention on having basic needs met or avoiding a negative experience, they cannot concentrate on the learning process. So while the physical safety of a learning environment is of course necessary, more subtle types of threats and distractions must be attended to as well. And so what is threatening or potentially distracting depends on the learner's individual needs and backgrounds, because an English language learner might find language experimentation threatening, while some learners might find that too much sensory stimulation distracting. So the optimal instructional environment offers options that reduce threats and negative distractions for everyone to create a safe space for which learning can occur. So you can vary the levels of novelty or risk that students are willing to take. You can also vary the level of sensory stimulation, and you can involve all participants in the whole class as a discussion. So again, these are just some of those recruiting interest strategies. And some additional strategies here are brain breaks. These are deliberate, intentional breaks during instruction where learners complete physical, mental, or breathing exercises. So these are always great, especially through long Zoom classes where just sitting in a chair, not the healthiest thing. For free play, this is a learner-initiated exercise that lets them actively engage in self-selected, unstructured play to develop social language skills. And some of these will be more applicable for other fields or subjects. And stop and jot. This is an activity where learners stop, think, and write what they are learning at a specific point to check for understanding. So the response from learners lets you gauge the level of understanding before moving on to the next section. And so that's pretty important because you're also getting real-time feedback from your learners this way. So looking at sustaining the effort and persistence in a course. So we're going to start with the heightened salience of goals and objectives. So over the course, of any sustained project or systematic practice, there are many sources of interest and engagement that compete for attention and effort. So for some learners, they need support to remember the initial goal or to maintain a consistent vision of the reward for reaching that goal. For those learners, it's important to build a periodic, persistent reminders of both the goal and the value in order for them to sustain the effort and concentration in the face of distractions. So here, you could prompt or require learners to explicitly formulate or restate the goal. Just kind of get them to say it in their own words so they're having to rethink about it and think about their approach. You could also engage learners in assessment discussions of what constitutes excellent and generate relevant examples. So now you're making it more relevant to your classroom in terms of what they would hope to achieve by the end of the class. Moving on, we're going to talk about the varied demands of resources and optimized challenge. So learners vary not only in their skills and abilities, but also in the kinds of challenges that motivate them to do their best work. So all learners need to be challenged, but not always in the same way. So providing a range of demands and a range of possible resources allows learners to find challenges that are optimally motivating, and balanced resources are also available to meet the challenge. To meet the challenge is vital. So here you can differentiate the degree of difficulty or complexity within one of the core activities. You can also provide alternatives in the permissible tools that scaffold into your course content. And you can even vary the degrees of freedom for acceptable performance. So this is where rubrics come into play. You can decide and determine, what's acceptable. Moving on, we're going to look at the foster collaboration and communication. So in the 21st century, all learners must be able to communicate and collaborate effectively within a community of learners. It must be flexible, and rather than having a fixed grouping, allows for better differentiation and multiple roles, as well as providing opportunities to learn how to work most effectively with others. So some options should be considered and learn how learners build and utilize these important social skills. So you can create a cooperative learning group with clear goals, roles, and responsibilities. So each one having maybe being a note taker, another being the presenter. Yeah, you could provide prompts that guide learners in when and how to ask their peers for help. So maybe having a discussion board that's a peer-to-peer engagement. They can ask questions and get a response from the students rather than just having to rely on the instructor. And you can create expectations for group work. So again, this is where you want to use rubrics and norms, just kind of set the standard for what they're expected to do as a group. And then lastly, we're going to increase the mastery-oriented feedback. So assessment is most productive for sustaining engagement when the feedback is relevant, constructive, accessible, consequential, and timely. But the type of feedback is also critical in helping learners to sustain the motivation and effort essential to learning. So mastery-oriented feedback is a type of feedback that guides learners towards mastery rather than a fixed notion of performance or compliance. So it also emphasizes the role of effort and practice rather than intelligence or inherent ability as an important factor in the guiding of learners towards successful long-term habits and learning practices. So these distinctions may be particularly important for learners whose disabilities have been interpreted by either themselves or their caregivers as permanently constraining and fixed. So here you can provide feedback that encourages perseverance, focuses on development and efficacy and self-awareness. You can also provide feedback that emphasizes effort, improvement, and achievement. And you can provide feedback that is substantive, informative, rather than comparative and competitive against others in the classroom. And so these are just some of the strategies for sustaining effort and persistence. We're looking at a flipped classroom here, which is an instructional approach where learners are given the responsibility to explore and study new content independently, while the time during the lesson is spent diving deeper into the content through enrichment and reinforcement activities. So I think we might all be seeing this now in our classrooms a bit more, where when it comes to class time, we're now engaging with the content that we were responsible for reading beforehand, so like pre-reading. We're also looking at Fishbowl, which is a large group activity where several learners participate in a discussion, while the remainder observing the conversation. So there's student leaders, and they're going to be presenting a chapter. So this is more of a peer-led kind of activity. We also have Jigsaw, and this is a form of cooperative learning where learners become the experts on the content and teach others the key terminology, understandings, and learnings of the research or analysis of the text. Again, this is just another strategy for sustaining effort and persistence for these students, and then also empowering them and having a role in the class for teaching their peers. It gives them that sense of mastery over the content. And then revision. So this is the process of incorporating feedback and adding on and refining specific elements of a previously submitted work. So again, this is where feedback needs to be timely, constructive, not overly competitive, and this is what really allows students to learn, because without feedback, they think they're doing everything right. Okay, and then lastly, we move into self-regulation. And this first point here is we want to promote expectations and beliefs that optimize motivation. So this is just an important aspect of self-regulation in that the personal knowledge each learner has about what he or she finds motivating, be it intrinsic or extrinsic. So to accomplish this, learners need to be able to set personal goals that can be realistically reached, as well as fostering positive beliefs that their goals can be met. So, however, learners also need to be able to deal with frustration and avoid anxiety when they are in the process of meeting their goals. So multiple options need to be given, once again, to stay motivated. So here you can provide prompts, reminders, guides, rubrics, checklists that focus on self-regulatory goals, increase the strength or increase the length of a task orientation in the face of distractions. You can also provide coaches, mentors, or agents that model the process of setting the personally appropriate goal. Or support activities that encourage self-reflection and identification of personal goals. And then lastly, or moving on to the second point, it facilitates personal coping skills and strategies. So this is where providing a model of self-regulatory skills is not sufficient for most learners. And Scaffolds. Such scaffolds should provide sufficient alternatives to meet the challenge of individual differences and the kinds of strategies that might be successful and the independence with which they can be applied. So here you can provide differentiated models, scaffolds, and feedback, seeking external emotional support, or use real-life situations or simulations to demonstrate coping skills. And then lastly, helps to develop assessment and reflection. So in order to develop better capacity for self-regulation, learners need to learn to monitor their emotions and reactivity carefully and accurately. So it's important, moreover, that learners have multiple models and scaffolds of different self-assessment techniques so that they can identify and choose ones that are optimal for them. So here you want to offer devices, aids, or charts that can assist an individual learning process, and use activities that include means by which learners get feedback and have access to alternative scaffolds that support understanding the progress in a manner that is understandable and timely to them. Okay, just some additional strategies for self-regulation. This is goal setting, which is the process of identifying academic, social, and behavioral goals, and this allows for determining the necessary steps to achieve the goal and creating a realistic time frame to meet them. There's also calming strategies. This is a self-regulation tool that can be taught to an individual or group when they're facing difficulty or challenging situations. And then exit tickets. This is a brief and formative assessment that gauges the learner's understanding of a concept or topic at the end of a class or session. So this is not a final exam, rather more just kind of a reflective piece of the student to, tell the instructor or write down or let the instructor know kind of on their way out, now that the course is wrapping up, what their understanding is now. And I just want to take a moment to plug Blackboard Ally. This is an accessibility layer that you're all going to be seeing later in the summer, a couple months. This will be activated, and this is just a component of UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, as we've been talking about it. This is going to provide multiple means of expression and engagement for course content. So your instructors are now going to be providing these different avenues that we've been talking about. So Blackboard Ally will be coming, and again, it'll provide, hopefully, or it'll increase student success for those who are looking for these alternative formats. And if you're an instructor and you want to activate the Blackboard Ally now, you can do that by emailing this address here. It's ats-instruction-or-design@csulb.edu, and we can enable this service now. But again, it will be rolled out campus-wide come summer. And with that, we're done. If there are any questions, I'm going to stop recording here. I'm going to stop sharing.